Mew and Mewtwo have always existed on opposite sides of the same cosmic thread, two beings forever intertwined and yet fundamentally unable to coexist. Their history begins long before either of them was ever witnessed by modern trainers, rooted in ancient myths, forbidden science, and the quiet tension between what nature creates and what humans attempt to replicate. Even though Mew moves with childlike serenity and Mewtwo stands with the intensity of a carved blade, there has always been a subtle, unspoken dislike between them, a deep, instinctive friction that comes from looking into a mirror that reflects everything they are and everything they never wanted to be. Mew sees Mewtwo as a distortion, a creature sculpted unnaturally from its own cells, while Mewtwo sees Mew as the original template it was never allowed to match. That mutual discomfort forms the foundation of their entire shared legacy. Mew drifts through the world like a dream, soft, weightless, and impossibly gentle. It floats more than it walks, swaying with little flips and spirals as though the air itself carries it along. Ancient civilizations across Pokémon history believed Mew was the source of all Pokémon life, not because it declared such a thing, but because its DNA contains the sequences of nearly every species ever discovered. Its presence feels primordial, a spark of creation still wandering through forests, caves, and hidden valleys untouched by human technology. When Mew appears, it rarely stays long. A glimpse, a soft chirp, a flash of pink, and it vanishes again, not out of fear, but because it has always existed in harmony with absence. Mew doesn't need to be seen to belong. It simply exists, content with being the quiet origin of everything. Mewtwo, in contrast, was born into noise, alarms, machinery, chemical vats, and calculations scrawled across glass walls. It didn't open its eyes to natural light or hear wind as its first sound. Instead, it awakened in a sterile chamber where it was observed, measured, and judged from the moment it breathed. That artificial beginning twisted something deep within it. Unlike Mew, who embraces stillness, Mewtwo exists in a constant state of tension. A creature engineered for control, yet denied autonomy until its first moments of rebellion. Its power wasn't nurtured, it was harvested. Its identity wasn't discovered, it was forced. The lingering resentment between Mew and Mewtwo begins here, in that contrast between gentle birth and fractured creation. Yet despite that divide, their abilities mirror each other like twins separated by fate. Both possess psychic powers of such magnitude that they can bend the world around them without even lifting a paw. Mew can conjure illusions, mimic any move it observes, and reshape its own body to adapt to environments. Mewtwo can tear apart landscapes, generate psychic storms, and manipulate consciousness with frightening precision. But the difference lies in intention. Mew moves with playful curiosity, using its powers as extensions of emotion. Mewtwo uses its powers with a surgical intensity, its psychic energy honed like a weapon, an edge sharpened because its creators designed it for superiority, not for understanding. Throughout history, the two have crossed paths only rarely, but when they do, the air is said to change, heavy, charged, almost trembling with the unspoken knowledge that nature and creation are staring directly at one another. Mew's soft glimmer of pink light seems to irritate Mewtwo, not because it fears Mew, but because Mew represents a truth Mewtwo has tried to outrun. That strength born from nature does not struggle, while strength born from science must constantly prove itself. Mew, on the other hand, avoids confrontation with Mewtwo because it senses the pain under its power. That quiet avoidance only frustrates Mewtwo further, deepening their mutual unease. Long before these tensions existed, ancient civilizations built temples in honor of Mew, believing it to be the ancestor of all Pokémon. petroglyphs found deep in jungle ruins depict a small, floating creature encircled by spirals, representing the cycles of life. Mew was not feared, but revered for its gentleness, a creature seen not as a deity, but as a silent caretaker of the natural world. These ruins suggest that Mew once appeared far more frequently than it does today, floating near early humans who lived in harmony with the forests. Over centuries, as the world modernized, Mew retreated deeper into hidden pockets of nature, becoming a myth that only the lucky or worthy ever encounter. Mewtwo's legacy, however, begins not with myth but with obsession. Scientists who uncovered fossilized remains believed to contain Mew's DNA became entranced by the idea of recreating its power. Their goal was not simply understanding, it was replication. They sought to create something beyond Mew, a being stronger, more controllable, and free of the whimsy that made Mew so unpredictable. The project that followed was a blend of brilliance and hubris, genetic tampering, forced growth, acceleration, mental conditioning, all applied to a creature whose very cells resisted confinement. The result was Mewtwo, a Pokémon whose abilities surpassed its creator's expectations, but whose spirit remained untamed. From the moment it opened its eyes, Mewtwo rejected the purpose assigned to it. This rejection marked the first fracture between the two beings. Mew represents freedom, life existing without permission. Mewtwo represents confinement, power created with chains already attached. When Mewtwo first felt Mew's presence, it wasn't awe it sensed, it was rage. Rage at the simplicity of something so complete. Rage at the fact that Mew needed nothing to be everything, while Mewtwo needed everything to feel like anything at all. That emotional clash made their first recorded confrontation almost inevitable. When they met, there was no battle between good and evil, only a collision between existence and creation. Yet, for all their differences, there remains a strange symmetry in the way Mew and Mewtwo interact with the world. Mew remains elusive, not because it fears others, but because its nature is transience. It wanders, learns, observes, and leaves without taking anything from the world. Mewtwo, though powerful beyond measure, isolates itself for a different reason, because it cannot forget what was done to it. Its solitude is not wandering, it's exile, a barrier between itself and the world that once tried to use it. The two drift through existence in parallel lines, Mew in peaceful drifting arcs, Mewtwo in rigid, lonely paths carved through mountains and abandoned laboratories. Despite never reconciling their differences, both Pokémon share a protective instinct. Mew protects the natural balance, appearing when something threatens the harmony of ecosystems. Mewtwo protects its autonomy, rising against control or cruelty wherever it senses it. In rare circumstances, this shared instinct forces their paths to cross again. When an outside threat overwhelms even Mew's calm or endangers Pokémon in ways Mewtwo cannot ignore, the two may fight alongside one another, not as allies, but as forces briefly aligned by circumstance. Even then, after the danger passes, Mew slips away and Mewtwo retreats, neither acknowledging the other's presence. To this day, researchers debate whether Mewtwo's dislike of Mew is rooted in jealousy, existential frustration, or the unavoidable truth that it exists because someone tampered with something that should have remained untouched. Meanwhile, Mew's discomfort comes from empathy, the kind of sadness that watches a wounded creature lash out because it doesn't know how to be at peace. Their relationship is complicated, emotional, and as old as the experiment that split their destinies apart. And yet, beneath the tension, there is a quiet understanding. Both creatures know they are different from the world around them. Both know they are watched, pursued, mythologized. Both know they carry the burden of being extraordinary. In that sense, they are mirrors of each other, even if the reflection is painful to acknowledge. Mewtwo's existence has always hovered somewhere between miracle and mistake, a being created with purpose, yet burdened by questions it never asked to be born with. While Mew drifts softly through the world like a whisper of ancient life, Mewtwo stands grounded, sharp-edged, and painfully aware of both its power and its isolation. This contrast between the two Pokémon becomes even more striking when you consider that they share the same genetic foundation. Mew's cells, filled with the full blueprint of Pokémon ancestry, were meant to create something extraordinary. Instead, they created a consciousness that came into the world without guidance, without comfort, and without the warm sense of belonging that Mew so naturally carries. The friction between them rests not in rivalry, but in misunderstanding, a fundamental difference in how they experience existence. Mewtwo was engineered to surpass every known Pokémon, yet its earliest moments were defined not by celebration, but by fear. Scientists watched it, measured it, experimented on it, trying to understand how far they could push the limits of power. They cataloged its psychic output, examined its reflexes, and forced its evolution through artificial means. Mewtwo learned quickly that strength alone did not earn affection. The more it grew, the more the researchers treated it like a weapon rather than a living being. So, when it finally broke free, its bitterness was not born from malice, but from the realization that no one in its life had ever chosen to care for it. That early loneliness shaped everything about its personality, the guarded tone of its voice, the wary stillness in its eyes, the instinct to distance itself from anyone who might try to define its purpose. Meanwhile, Mew remains the embodiment of joy. Its playful movements and gentle curiosity seem almost contradictory when compared to the ancient power it carries within its tiny frame. Legends describe it as the ancestor of all Pokémon, a creature that contains the genetic secrets of countless species, yet it never behaves with superiority or solemnity. Instead, it floats through ruins, forests, and forgotten caves as though exploring the world for the first time every single day. Mew does not fear others. It does not judge. It simply experiences. This carefree spirit is one of the reasons Mew rarely interacts directly with humans. It prefers to remain hidden, appearing only when it senses pure intentions or when its playful nature leads it to reveal itself by accident. The meaningful contrast is that Mewtwo, created from Mew's DNA, inherited none of Mew's gentleness, but all of its strength. Instead of floating through life, Mewtwo confronts it. Instead of curiosity, it carries caution. Instead of joy, it carries purpose, imposed from the outside. This is why their early meetings were so filled with tension. Mew looked at Mewtwo with familiarity, recognizing its own genetic echo, but Mewtwo saw Mew as a reminder of everything it lacked: the childhood it never had, the peace it never learned, the acceptance it never felt. Their dislike for each other was quiet, unspoken, and rooted in tragedy. Mew wished to understand, while Mewtwo wished not to feel at all. But over time, as both Pokémon came to inhabit the world more freely, their relationship shifted. Mewtwo's sharp edge softened as it witnessed how other Pokémon lived. Trainers treated their partners with kindness, loyalty, and patience, ideas Mewtwo had never associated with humans. It watched younger Pokémon nap peacefully in sunlit grass and saw battles fought not with hatred but with trust. Slowly, Mewtwo began to question whether its view of the world had been shaped entirely by its painful beginnings. And in the stillness of that questioning, Mew would sometimes appear, drifting just out of reach, watching without judgment. Mew did not try to confront Mewtwo or push it toward reconciliation. Instead, Mew allowed it space, teaching through presence rather than words. This subtle shift marks one of the rare instances in legendary lore where two mythical beings grow not as symbols but as characters. Mew, often thought of as a mischievous spirit, took on a gentler role, a patient watcher, offering the possibility of peace. Mewtwo, often described as cold or distant, began to develop a more nuanced understanding of identity. It realized that strength without direction led only to emptiness, and that its purpose did not have to be defined by the scientists who created it. It could choose its own meaning, something Mew had understood effortlessly from the beginning. The deeper lore surrounding Mew is filled with mysteries that continue to fascinate researchers even generations later. Its ability to use almost every known move has puzzled scientists. Some theories suggest that its genetic structure contains dormant instructions for abilities across multiple evolutionary lines, allowing it to adapt in ways no other Pokémon can. Others believe Mew's flexibility comes from its ancient role as the progenitor of Pokémon diversity, with its DNA being the foundation upon which later species evolved. This concept places Mew at the very root of Pokémon history, not as a godlike creator, but as a natural ancestor, a living fossil that survives out of pure curiosity rather than necessity. Mewtwo, by contrast, represents the modern era's obsession with control. Its abilities were shaped by intentional manipulation, refined through forced evolution, and influenced by human ambition. It possesses extraordinary psychic power because it was designed to. But that design came with cost, physical strain, mental overload, and a deep awareness of its own artificial origin. Psychologists in the Pokémon world theorize that Mewtwo's early emotional instability came from experiencing complex thought before developing a stable sense of identity. While Mew can play like a child despite its ancient age, Mewtwo was born as an adult without ever having the chance to grow into itself naturally. This difference is reflected beautifully in their psychic abilities. Mew uses psychic power like an extension of its whimsy, floating upside down, creating invisible platforms to bounce from, or lifting small stones just to watch them spin. Mewtwo uses psychic energy like an extension of its will, precise, intense, deliberate. It conjures barriers that ripple with strength, channels telekinetic force with mathematical precision, and can manipulate environments on a massive scale. Their strengths are comparable, but their styles reveal everything about who they are. Mew expresses freedom, Mewtwo expresses control, and yet, despite these differences, their powers are intertwined. In some rare accounts, when Mewtwo meditates long enough, its psychic aura stabilizes into a softer, rounder form, almost reminiscent of Mew's playful energy. Mew, similarly, becomes more focused and serious when confronted with threats, suggesting that underneath its gentle exterior lies an ancient depth of power that mirrors Mewtwo's intensity. They are opposites not because they are different species, but because they represent different interpretations of the same origin. This balance comes into play when discussing their encounters across Pokémon lore. In various stories, Mew and Mewtwo stand as mirrors to each other, one showing what life can be when it grows naturally, the other showing how life adapts when shaped by unnatural force. Their dislike in early encounters was never hatred, it was discomfort. Mew saw Mewtwo's pain, but did not know how to bridge the gap. Mewtwo saw Mew's freedom, but felt unworthy of it. Over years, their interactions became less tense, not through dramatic battles, but through quiet recognition. Each began to understand that neither was flawed. They were simply reflections of different beginnings. As the legend of Mewtwo spread, more regions recorded sightings of it meditating in remote mountains, caves, or abandoned facilities. In those moments, witnesses sometimes reported faint glimpses of a smaller, glowing shape nearby, floating gently as if keeping watch. Whether these sightings were genuine or embellishments, the symbolism remains beautiful. The ancient and the artificial, the free and the forged, each finding a kind of stability in the other's presence. Mew, too, continued to leave traces around the world. Playful markings in ancient jungles, psychic residue in research laboratories, feathers and flowers gently rearranged in patterns that scholars couldn't explain. These subtle signs sparked theories that Mew intentionally avoids being fully discovered, not because it fears humanity, but because mystery itself is part of its role. Mew represents possibility, the potential for new discoveries, new Pokémon, and new understandings of the world. If it were fully understood, that sense of endless potential might fade. So it remains hidden, appearing only when curiosity outweighs caution. Mewtwo's legacy, meanwhile, is tied to its quest for identity. It learned over time that it did not have to reject humanity entirely, nor fully embrace it. Instead, it carved its own path, independent, thoughtful, and guided by its own moral compass. It became a protector in its own way, not because it was told to, but because it chose to. That choice, simple as it seems, is everything. It gave Mewtwo something Mew always had: freedom. Together, Mew and Mewtwo represent two sides of the same ancient story: the natural and the artificial, the joyful and the burdened, the playful and the purposeful. Their relationship may have begun with distance, but over time it evolved into something more balanced, more nuanced, and far more meaningful. They are no longer mirrors of conflict, but mirrors of understanding, each teaching the other something essential about what it means to exist in a world filled with constant change. The strained relationship between Mew and Mewtwo becomes even more interesting when you consider how differently the world itself reacts to them. Mew moves through environments like a soft breeze drifting past leaves, welcomed by the forests, oceans, and skies it helped populate. The natural world responds to Mew's presence with an almost instinctive warmth, as though every living thing recognizes the ancient spark inside it. Mewtwo, however, moves like a disruption, not destructive by intention, but disruptive simply because its power radiates outward in raw, unstable waves. Electronic devices spike or flicker, psychic Pokémon stiffen cautiously, and even the air feels heavier around it. It's not malice, it's magnitude. Mewtwo carries weight the world isn't naturally designed to absorb, and Mew carries gentleness the world instinctively embraces. Yet that difference in how they interact with the world hints at potential harmony, not conflict. Their relationship isn't one of sworn enemies, it's one of imbalance. Mewtwo represents unrefined potential, the kind of overwhelming force that science can create when it attempts to mimic nature without understanding it fully. Mew, meanwhile, represents natural equilibrium, the kind of patient, generational evolution that allowed life to thrive long before humans began studying it. When Mew looks at Mewtwo, it sees a fragment of itself, powerful, unique, extraordinary, but accelerated through human desperation rather than time. And when Mewtwo looks at Mew, it sees something unbearably frustrating: proof that power can exist without suffering, without being forced into existence, and without needing control to feel complete. Much of Mew's lore across regions describes it as the ancestor of all Pokémon, not in the literal genealogical sense, but in the spiritual and genetic sense. Mew is said to carry the blueprint of life within its DNA, a swirling archive of history encoded into every strand. That's why Mew can learn almost any move, adapt to nearly any environment, and survive conditions that would destroy most other creatures. It isn't specialized, it is universal. In many myths, Mew was the spark that set life into motion, exploring the newborn world with innocent curiosity and scattering possibilities wherever it drifted. Even in modern times, when sightings are rare, that sense of ancient innocence remains part of its legend. Mew never lost its sense of wonder. Mewtwo, however, began its existence without wonder, only confusion. The cloning experiment that created it was not built on curiosity, but on ambition, fear, and the desire for control. Mewtwo's earliest memories were of sterile lights, scientific instruments, and the overwhelming weight of expectations from the humans who created it. It was born aware, but not nurtured. Intelligent, but not comforted. Its mind developed in a vacuum. Raw power without emotional context. That contrast between origins shaped its early worldview. Where Mew drifted freely, Mewtwo fought merely to understand why it existed at all. Despite their differences, both Pokémon share an extraordinary psychic connection to the world around them. Mew's psychic abilities flow naturally, effortless, soft, playful. It hovers, twirls, shapeshifts, even disappears and reappears as if reality is merely a suggestion. When Mew scans an environment, it does so with gentle curiosity, reading emotions and energies without overwhelming those around it. Its psychic aura feels like sunlight through leaves, warm, soothing, nostalgic. Mewtwo's psychic aura is something entirely different. Its power condenses around it like a gravitational field, dense and potent. When it focuses, the air trembles. When it unleashes power, shockwaves ripple outward with enough force to bend stone or distort electromagnetic fields. But beneath that intensity rests precision. Mewtwo doesn't lose control of its psychic strength because of lack of intelligence. It loses control because its emotions burn hotter than its creators anticipated. In moments of calm, its psychic power becomes razor sharp, precise enough to manipulate atoms. In moments of distress, it becomes a storm. That dual nature is the core conflict within Mewtwo, a mind built for clarity trapped within a heart burdened by origin. One of the most compelling mysteries surrounding Mew is how it maintains such innocence despite its age. If the myths are true, Mew is older than nearly every legend in the Pokémon world, predating even ancient civilizations. Yet it behaves with childlike playfulness, a perpetual joy that seems untouched by time. Many researchers believe this behavior isn't naivety, it's wisdom. Mew has lived long enough to understand that joy is not a distraction from life, but the purpose of it. That carefree nature may be its way of safeguarding mental stability across millennia. A creature with limitless potential might risk collapsing under the weight of history if it didn't choose levity. In that sense, Mew's playfulness is survival. Mewtwo, by contrast, never had time to learn peace before being thrust into power. It had intelligence from the moment it opened its eyes, but it had no framework for emotions, relationships, or purpose. While Mew received centuries to explore and grow slowly, Mewtwo had minutes. Its mind raced, its power swelled, and its spiraling thoughts had nowhere to rest. This imbalance created its earliest turmoil. It wasn't that Mewtwo was dangerous, it was lost. And when a being capable of shattering mountains feels lost, the world feels it too. Even so, across various retellings in games, anime, and lore, Mewtwo eventually begins to understand something Mew has known for ages. Solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Mew prefers solitude because it is content. Mewtwo was lonely because it didn't know how not to be. When Mewtwo first encountered Mew, that difference felt insulting, like Mew had effortlessly achieved emotional balance Mewtwo had fought desperately to find. But as time passed, Mewtwo began to see that Mew's gentleness wasn't weakness, it was control in its finest form. Not the control Mewtwo sought through power, but the control that comes from acceptance. Their earliest recorded confrontation, preserved differently across multiple timelines and adaptations, always carries the same emotional structure, regardless of the version. Mewtwo challenges Mew because it wants to prove something, either to Mew, to itself, or to the world. Mew responds with neutrality, almost reluctance, as if understanding that Mewtwo's rage is a symptom, not an enemy. And once the battle unfolds, something fascinating happens. Mew mirrors Mewtwo. Not just its moves, but its mindset. Mew matches Mewtwo's power level, not through aggression, but to show Mewtwo a truth it cannot articulate. You are not alone in your power. That moment, repeated across generations of storytelling, is pivotal. Mewtwo, who believed itself singular, a burdened creation, is forced to confront a being that carries the same potential effortlessly, not to shame it, but to reflect it. Mew has no desire to dominate Mewtwo. Its goal, whether consciously or instinctively, is to balance Mewtwo's pain with understanding, and that realization becomes the foundation of their long, complicated relationship, neither enemy nor companion, but mirrors of each other's possible futures. Scientifically, Mewtwo remains one of the most extraordinary achievements in Pokémon history, a being whose power ceiling remains unknown. The fact that it can mega-evolve into two distinct forms, each amplifying different aspects of its psyche, hints at how malleable its potential truly is. Mega Mewtwo X embodies physical dominance, an outward expression of the internal struggle to ground itself. Mega Mewtwo Y represents pure psychic refinement, the sharpening of its mind into near-perfect clarity. Mew, by contrast, has no recorded mega evolution because it doesn't need one. Its ability to shapeshift, adapt, and evolve mentally rather than physically means its potential is already flexible. Mew embodies infinite possibility without the need for structured amplification. One of the most touching aspects of Mew's personality is how it interacts with children in various stories. Across regions, there are myths of Mew appearing before young trainers or wandering near playgrounds, drawn not by strength or ambition, but by innocence. Children often see Mew without realizing its significance, describing it as a floating pink creature that laughed, played games, or made funny faces. Adults rarely believe them, assuming its imagination, which only deepens the myth. Mew chooses to reveal itself not to show off, but because children share its worldview, wonder first, analysis later. Mewtwo's interactions with humans couldn't be more different. It rarely approaches children, not out of malice, but out of fear of causing harm. Even when calm, Mewtwo's aura hums with intensity that could overwhelm untrained minds. It keeps distance not because it dislikes humanity, but because it respects fragility. That restraint is one of the clearest signs of Mewtwo's growth. The creature, once enraged by its existence, now protects others from the intensity of its presence, a maturity born from understanding what power truly means. The more you explore their lore, the more apparent it becomes that Mew and Mewtwo are not opposite ends of a spectrum, but different expressions of the same core truth, potential shaped by circumstance. Mew represents potential that grew naturally, gently, freely. Mewtwo represents potential accelerated, weaponized, and burdened. One isn't better than the other. They simply carry different histories, and yet, both have influenced the Pokémon world more than nearly any other species. They have shaped research, mythology, ethics, and even the laws around genetic study. Their legacy continues in every retelling, every new game that references ancient experiments, every ruin hinting at Mew's primordial presence. Even when they aren't physically present, their influence echoes through the franchise's world building. The cloning debates of Kanto, the genetic myths of Sinnoh, the mysterious references to ancient DNA, all of it ties back to two beings who share a single spark, and through it all, their strained bond endures, not as hatred, but as unresolved reflection. Mew sees what Mewtwo struggles to become. Mewtwo sees what Mew never had to endure. Their stories, intertwined by origin but separated by experience, form one of the deepest emotional narratives in Pokémon lore. Two beings, linked by creation, divided by circumstance, and slowly, quietly learning that even the most powerful creatures don't have to carry their existence alone. Mewtwo's story has always been rooted in conflict, a constant tension between what it was created to be and what it chose to become. And nowhere is that tension clearer than in the shadow it forever casts against Mew. Even when it tries to distance itself from its origins, the world seems to place them side by side, one as the source, the other as the result. Their dislike of each other isn't simple hostility, but something deeper, almost gravitational. Two forces meant to be connected, but refusing to orbit peacefully. Whenever they meet, even in brief lore fragments across different games and stories, the air around them seems to change, as if the universe itself recognizes that these two beings were never meant to exist comfortably together. This invisible tension often manifests in subtle ways. Mewtwo senses Mew's presence with an instinct that borders on resentment, not because Mew has harmed it, but because Mew embodies something Mewtwo can never reclaim: purity. Mew drifts through the world with childlike curiosity, untouched by fear or anger, while Mewtwo navigates existence with a weight that was placed on it long before it had a choice. Every time it catches even a glimpse of Mew's effortless joy, it feels the gap between what it is and what it could have been widen. This is why their encounters rarely begin peacefully. Mewtwo avoids Mew not out of hatred, but out of the painful reminder that it is a shadow cast by another Pokémon's light. Yet Mew doesn't return this tension with bitterness. In fact, Mew seems blissfully unaware of the emotional storm it triggers in Mewtwo. When the two cross paths, Mew floats and flip turns through the air, responding to Mewtwo's seriousness with gentle teasing, a tilt of the head, a playful sparkle in its eyes, or a slow drift closer as though trying to understand the weight Mewtwo carries. Some researchers believe Mew feels empathy toward Mewtwo, sensing that its clone shares a part of its DNA, but not fully grasping the emotional complexity involved. Because Mew experiences the world so simply and sincerely, it cannot understand why Mewtwo stiffens at its presence or grows cold whenever Mew tries to interact. This difference in temperament has fueled theories in the Pokémon world about whether Mewtwo's creation was flawed, or whether its emotional intensity is a natural byproduct of its immense psychic power. Unlike Mew, whose abilities are stable and playful, Mewtwo's powers are raw and sharp, sharpened even further by the trauma of awakening in a laboratory. Some scientists have proposed that Mewtwo's psychic strength amplifies its emotions to an overwhelming degree, making every interaction feel more extreme than intended. Mew, however, regulates emotion the way it regulates its playful teleports, lightly, effortlessly, with no strain. This emotional imbalance is another reason why they struggle to coexist. Their conflicting energies also show up in their behavior during battles. While Mewtwo fights with precision and overwhelming force, Mew avoids battle unless necessary, using clever tricks, misdirection, and sheer agility. Mewtwo's movements are crisp and sharp, driven by purpose and discipline. Mew's are fluid and spontaneous, unclear even to those trying to study it. This dichotomy has been studied in the Pokémon world as an example of genetic divergence under artificial pressure. Mewtwo became something Mew never needed to be, a creature defined by strength. Meanwhile, Mew remained shaped by exploration, adaptation, and quiet wonder. This tension becomes even more interesting when considering the role they play in the broader history of Pokémon species. Mew, as the ancestor of all Pokémon, carries the genetic blueprint of almost every species in existence. Its DNA contains infinite potential, the ability to mimic moves, shift behavior, and survive in virtually any environment. Scientists who studied Mew during rare encounters noted that its genetic material appears unfinished, not in the sense of being flawed, but in being foundational. It is the blank page from which evolution wrote its stories. Mewtwo, by contrast, is not a blank page. It is a calculated rewrite, a structured and amplified fragment of Mew's original script. This is why many Pokémon researchers describe Mew as the origin of possibility, while Mewtwo is the result of intention. Mew never tries to be anything other than what it is, a wandering, curious Pokémon that seems to drift through history with no urgency. Mewtwo, however, was made for purpose. Every cell in its body exists because someone wanted it to. That difference in creation leads to a remarkably different worldview. Mew believes in freedom because it has never known anything else. Mewtwo questions freedom because it has experienced the lack of it so vividly. Even physically, the contrast is telling. Mew's form is small and gentle, with soft movements that resemble a kitten or baby animal. It curls into balls when resting, floats like a feather on the wind, and often plays with objects using its paws or tail, a sign of intelligence expressed through curiosity. Mewtwo's form, however, is tall, powerful, and engineered for psychic amplification. Its tail acts like a stabilizer, its arm structure is adapted for precision attacks, and its posture resembles that of an engineered warrior rather than a naturally evolved creature. Where Mew's body expresses potential, Mewtwo's expresses purpose. The stories documented in ancient ruins across Kanto suggest that Mew was once revered by early cultures who witnessed its rare appearances. Cave paintings in locations like the Sevi Islands show small, floating creatures resembling Mew, surrounded by symbols of creation and renewal. These cultures seem to interpret Mew's appearance as a sign of prosperity, adaptability, and harmony with nature. Mewtwo, whose existence is modern and known only due to scientific records, never had the luxury of ancient myth. Instead, its story is recorded in damaged laboratory notes, abandoned files, and the whispered testimonies of those who survived its awakening. These scattered documents describe early attempts to stabilize Mew's DNA, with researchers noting its fluid, unpredictable sequencing. The attempt to refine that unpredictability into something controlled ultimately created Mewtwo's unique psychic network, incredibly efficient and extraordinarily volatile. Some scientists argued that the volatility was a flaw. Others said it was the expected result of compressing limitless potential into a singular form. Either way, the outcome was undeniable. Mewtwo's birth was not gentle like Mew's presence. It was violent, unstable, and traumatic, shaping its perception of the world from its first moments. This contrast between a creature born from nature and one born from ambition continues to shape their lore. Many theories suggest that Mewtwo's dislike of Mew stems from a deeper psychological conflict. Mew is everything Mewtwo was forced to leave behind. Mew drifts through life without fear. Mewtwo learned fear before it learned language. Mew adapts effortlessly to any environment. Mewtwo spent its early life confined to a sterile chamber. Mew symbolizes infinite potential. Mewtwo symbolizes the limits that come from trying to control that potential. And yet, despite all this, There are hints across multiple games and stories that Mewtwo isn't incapable of understanding Mew, only afraid of what that understanding might unlock. Moments in the franchise show Mewtwo observing Mew from a distance. Its expression, not angry, but contemplative, almost longing. It watches Mew play, interact, and drift without care, as though studying a version of itself that never existed. Some fans and researchers believe Mewtwo envies Mew not for its power, but for its peace. Peace is something Mewtwo has chased for years, always finding it just out of reach. Even when alone, it struggles to quiet its mind. Its psychic abilities pick up faint energy signatures, emotional pulses, and distant thoughts, making isolation both necessary and frustrating. Mew, on the other hand, moves through the world without absorbing its weight. It brushes past emotions without holding them, maintaining an innocence that seems impervious to complexity. To Mewtwo, this quality feels impossible, as though Mew is a living reminder of a life that could never be. Yet the world continues to link them because they are bound by origin. Mewtwo cannot escape the fact that its power comes from Mew's DNA, and Mew cannot comprehend why sharing its genetic code would lead to conflict. They are a paradox: origin and outcome, innocence and experience, possibility and purpose. And even though they try to avoid each other, destiny seems determined to place them on the same path again and again. In exploring their lore, researchers often describe them as mirror opposites whose reflections cannot align. One reflects what nature created, the other reflects what humans attempted to perfect. And somewhere in the middle of that divide, the story of their dislike, their tension, their reluctant connection continues to evolve, shaping one of the most emotionally complex relationships in all of Pokémon history. Mewtwo has always carried itself like a creature sculpted from conflict, while Mew moves through the world with the carefree grace of something untouched by consequences. Yet their stories continue to circle each other like reflections on opposite sides of the same mirror. Even in the rare moments when their paths cross in lore, the air between them feels charged with the tension of two beings who were never meant to exist in the same moment. Mew's presence is gentle, luminous, and impossibly old. Mewtwo's presence feels sharpened by purpose, shaped by centuries of humanity's hopes and fears, all compressed into a psychic force that never stops humming beneath its calm exterior. And yet, despite their differences, there is a strange familiarity between them, a recognition that even Mewtwo cannot deny. Mew is the blueprint from which it was created, the ancient source code behind every strand of its existence. To Mew, however, Mewtwo is not a child, not a branch of its lineage, not a companion. Rather, it is something foreign that grew from its shadow. This dissonance is the origin of their quiet dislike. Mewtwo resents the idea that it is merely a reflection of an older being who never asked to create it, and Mew resents the echo of its own power being used to build a life scarred by suffering. Their conflict is not one of aggression, but of existential distance. Despite this, both Pokémon share a remarkable connection to the world's psychic energy. Mew feels the currents of the planet the same way a bird feels the wind beneath its wings, instinctively, gently, effortlessly. Mewtwo interacts with those same currents like a master of combat, bending them, shaping them, weaponizing them with precision born from intelligence rather than instinct. Where Mew floats, Mewtwo strikes. Where Mew listens, Mewtwo analyzes. And yet, their psychic abilities are undeniably linked, reflecting different expressions of the same cosmic potential. Mew's ability to learn any move has always fascinated researchers. Its DNA is a kind of living library, containing traces of every Pokémon lineage. This makes it one of the most important biological mysteries in the world. A creature that seems to embody the concept of possibility itself. From simple physical moves to complex elemental attacks, Mew can replicate nearly anything it encounters. This adaptability is part of why it remains almost impossible to study. It refuses to be predictable. One moment it might be practicing ancient techniques long forgotten by modern Pokémon, and in the next, it may vanish into thin air, leaving behind no trace except the faint echo of a giggle. Mewtwo, on the other hand, has no interest in such whimsical displays. Its power is measured, calculated, and terrifyingly efficient. It seeks mastery, not variety. When Mewtwo perfects a technique, it becomes an extension of its will. Psychic blades that never waver, barriers stronger than steel, telekinetic waves so precise they can rearrange molecules. The contrast between their abilities reveals the contrast between their souls. Mew embodies potential without limitation, while Mewtwo embodies power created for a purpose that it never asked to fulfill. There is a recurring piece of lore suggesting that Mewtwo's psychic abilities are so advanced that they continue evolving over time, as though its mind is constantly rewriting itself. After its creation, Mewtwo's power rapidly multiplied, forcing scientists to abandon their studies for fear of losing control. Even today, researchers believe Mewtwo has not reached its full psychic capacity. It continues to grow, refine, and expand its abilities through constant self-reflection, pushing its limits further each year. This makes Mewtwo one of the few Pokémon whose power is not defined by nature but by sheer will. Mew, meanwhile, possesses a completely different kind of psychic perception, one tied to emotion rather than force. It can sense kindness, fear, confusion, and wonder in others, and it often reacts by mirroring those emotions. If it finds someone gentle, it becomes playful. If it senses unrest, it becomes cautious. This emotional awareness may explain why Mew so often remains hidden from humans. It doesn't avoid people because it dislikes them, but because it understands them too well. Their fears, hopes, and anxieties form a storm of thoughts louder than anything found in nature. Mew prefers places where the psychic noise of the world quiets: ancient forests, untouched caves, floating ruins suspended above the clouds. The ruins that appear in various regions of the world carry markings that many believe to be inspired by Mew, though no one has confirmed whether this is due to ancient encounters or simply legends built around sightings. Mew seems to gravitate toward places where time moves slowly, where the past and present blend together. Some legends even describe Mew appearing to ancient civilizations in moments of need, guiding their understanding of Pokémon life and harmony. These stories remain unproven, but they echo a universal belief. Mew is the origin, the forgotten muse behind the world's earliest Pokémon myths. Mewtwo's relationship with ancient sites is far colder. It has no interest in relics or old stories. The ruins that fascinate Mew are, to Mewtwo, irrelevant leftovers from a world that misunderstood the purpose of power. This difference reflects their personal philosophies. Mew looks backward with curiosity and affection, while Mewtwo looks forward with determination and careful skepticism. To Mew, history is a source of wisdom. To Mewtwo, history is a collection of mistakes. Despite these conflicting worldviews, there are moments where their paths unintentionally overlap. On rare occasions, they have been known to appear near the same location, drawn by unusual fluctuations in psychic energy. In these moments, the air becomes electric, the atmosphere shifts, and the world itself seems to hold its breath. Mew watches with quiet detachment, floating gently with its tail curled like a question mark. Mewtwo stands rigid, analyzing, calculating, prepared for conflict, despite knowing neither wishes to fight. Their meetings never last long. Mew drifts away before tension rises, and Mewtwo lets it go, not out of kindness, but because the moment reveals something it does not want to confront. That even with all its power, it will never embody the effortless grace of the creature whose shadow gave it life. The emotional gap between them deepens this quiet rivalry. Mewtwo sees in Mew everything it was denied: innocence, freedom, and a life untouched by manipulation. Mew sees in Mewtwo everything it never wanted to create: suffering, conflict, and a mind sharpened by pain. Their dislike is not born of hatred, but of reflection. They represent each other's missing halves, and that realization makes them uneasy whenever they meet. Even so, their strengths are undeniably complementary. Together, they form a psychic spectrum unmatched by any other Pokémon in existence. Mew embodies the past, ancient genetic memory, forgotten possibilities, the foundation of life. Mewtwo embodies the future, evolution through thought, adaptation through will, the idea that existence can move forward even when the path behind is fractured. They are not friends, not enemies, but cosmic opposites bound by a thread of shared origin. This complexity makes their combined presence in lore particularly compelling. When myths speak of psychic storms, shaking mountaintops, or ancient forests glowing under mysterious psychic pressure, scholars speculate whether such events were caused by the rare proximity of these two beings. The world itself seems to react when they pass near each other, as if their existence creates ripples in reality. Mew's behavior after these encounters reflects its desire for peace. It withdraws deeper into the wild, seeking quiet places where its thoughts can settle. Mewtwo's behavior shows the opposite: increased focus, heightened training, deeper introspection. It responds not with retreat, but with resolve, determined to refine itself so that it can stand independently of the shadow it comes from. And yet, despite the tension between them, there is no denying that both Pokémon have shaped the world in ways few others can claim. One shaped the origins of Pokémon life, the other reshaped the understanding of what humans can create. Their differences are vast, but their existence remains intertwined. Two sides of a psychic coin that continues to turn through history, reflecting different truths depending on how the light hits it. Across the world, countless researchers have attempted to understand why Mew and Mewtwo feel so fundamentally opposed, despite sharing the same genetic roots. Their abilities mirror each other, their psychic potential sits on the same near-divine edge, and yet, emotionally, they exist on two entirely separate frequencies. Mew drifts through the world like a dream, light-hearted, curious, touched with the innocence of something that has seen too much to take anything too seriously. Mewtwo, by contrast, carries weight in every step, shaped by a life in which nothing was gentle. The friction between them isn't hatred. It's more like an echo meeting a wall, one playful and ancient, the other burdened and sharpened, and that divide becomes clearer the deeper one goes into their individual histories. Mew's earliest recorded appearances trace back thousands of years, far earlier than any written text. Cave markings in regions across the world depict a small, cat-like creature with a long, looping tail, often surrounded by symbols of creation, life, or transformation. These etchings aren't tied to any single culture. They appear in Johto's ancient stones, Hoenn's sandstone tunnels, and even Unova's earliest ruins. This universality is what led early researchers to speculate that Mew either traveled widely across the ancient world or existed in a population far larger than the rare sightings suggest today. Over time, these depictions shifted from common in ancient art to exceedingly rare in recent centuries, implying Mew's species slowly withdrew from human awareness as civilizations advanced. This long withdrawal might explain Mew's free-spirited nature. Unlike most Pokémon, Mew had the luxury of existing before humans began shaping ecosystems and territories. It never adapted to avoid humans out of fear. It simply drifted away from them as their worlds diverged. That drifting behavior remains part of its essence. Even in the modern era, Mew refuses to be bound to any specific location. It appears in tropical forests one month, snowy mountains the next, then in floating ruins or hidden islands in between. Its ability to levitate effortlessly, rotate midair, and vanish without warning reinforces the idea that Mew doesn't merely travel, it wanders. It experiences the world without agenda, like an explorer with no interest in mapping the destination. Mewtwo, meanwhile, was born into confinement. Every characteristic that Mew possesses, naturally its psychic freedom, its adaptability, its playful ease, became the very traits scientists tried to amplify artificially in the clone. The process that created Mewtwo wasn't just experimentation, it was a deliberate attempt to build a living weapon. While Mew's abilities grew in open air and deep forests, Mewtwo's powers surged inside a sterile chamber, pressured by observation, molded by expectation. That origin alone explains part of its nature. Mew drifts because it has nothing to fear. Mewtwo stands rigid because everything was once a threat. Their mutual dislike arises from this gap. Mew represents what Mewtwo feels it can never return to, and Mewtwo represents the unnatural edge of a world Mew never wanted to influence. This tension becomes more fascinating when examining how differently they use their identical psychic genomes. Mew's psychic abilities behave almost like a soft breeze. It lifts objects without strain, shapeshifts without effort, and cloaks itself with illusions not out of necessity, but out of curiosity. Researchers believe its malleable DNA allows it to mimic nearly every Pokémon species, which is why it can use moves from nearly any type. These transformations aren't dramatic, they're playful. Mew imitates Pokémon to understand them, to join in their games, or simply to experience what it feels like to move differently for a moment. Its psychic power folds into its emotions seamlessly, making even its strongest feats appear effortless. Mewtwo's abilities, however, feel like sharpened versions of the same potential. Where Mew's psychic field moves softly, Mewtwo strikes like a blade. Its telekinesis is instantaneous, heavy, and precise. It doesn't lift objects, it crushes, halts, redirects, or shatters them. Its teleportation is less of a gentle flicker and more of a spatial distortion, bending cleanly around its will. And its psychic aura fluctuates like an unstable flame, always present, always powerful, always carrying the faint tension of something created to push its limits. Because Mewtwo never had the chance to develop its powers gradually, its mind adapted by learning control through intensity. Every action is deliberate, rigid, perfected through trial rather than instinct. Both Mew and Mewtwo also display high emotional intelligence, but in drastically different ways. Mew perceives emotion almost like a song. It responds with warmth to sad trainers, drifts closer to playful Pokémon, and quietly avoids those who radiate anger or fear. It has no desire to interfere, yet its presence calms environments without trying. Legends describe Mew hovering above children lost in forests or appearing beside tired travelers, offering comfort simply by existing. That instinctive empathy reinforces the idea that Mew evolves socially as much as biologically. Mewtwo, in contrast, senses emotion as threat detection. Being surrounded by scientists who viewed it not as a living being, but as a weapon forced its psychic instincts towards self-preservation. When it feels intense emotions from others' fear, anger, suspicion, Mewtwo interprets them as potential harm. That's why it tends to isolate itself, often retreating to remote caves, mountains, or even abandoned ruins where psychic input is minimal. It avoids emotional closeness because closeness has never meant safety. And yet, Mewtwo is capable of incredible compassion once its trust is earned. Canonical accounts describe it protecting wild Pokémon with startling gentleness, shielding them from harm with its own psychic energy, and offering sanctuary in hidden places far from human interference. That capacity for tenderness is what makes Mewtwo so complex. It distrusts not out of cruelty, but out of learned caution. Then there's the question of lifespan. Mew is believed to be effectively ageless. Its slow, drifting lifestyle, highly adaptive DNA, and lack of territorial stress contribute to an existence that seems almost eternal. That longevity is why so many myths label it a child of immortality, a creature that remembers the world before humans cataloged it. Mewtwo, though genetically similar, does not share this ageless quality. Its artificially accelerated growth left certain genomic structures less stable, meaning its lifespan, while long by most standards, may never reach the timelessness Mew enjoys. This difference, subtle but meaningful, hints at why their worldviews diverge so drastically. Mew has time to forgive, time to wander, time to change. Mewtwo was born into pressure, and pressure leaves imprints. Mew's shape-shifting abilities also have deep implications. Its DNA structure, capable of expressing traits from seemingly any Pokémon lineage, suggests it might be the biological ancestor to countless species. Whether this is literal or symbolic remains debated, but no other Pokémon exhibits genome fluidity to such an extreme. Its body adapts as effortlessly as its behavior. It can swim like a water type, float like a psychic type, dash like an electric type, or curl its form into smaller shapes like certain grass or bug types. These transformations aren't perfect mimicry, they're impressions, like an artist's sketch. But even these soft copies reveal how Mew perceives the world, not through limitations, but through infinite potential. Mewtwo's genome, while derived from Mew's, is intentionally edited to remove this fluidity. The scientists who created it narrowed its genetic focus to prioritize psychic power above all else. That narrowing removed the playful adaptability that defines Mew. Mewtwo cannot shapeshift, cannot alter its form softly, cannot blend into the environment the way Mew does. Instead, every ounce of its genetic expression is poured into a single purpose: psychic mastery. This intensification is why Mewtwo's attacks surpass even legendary Pokémon. But that specialization came at the cost of warmth. It lost the gentler, wandering spirit Mew embodies. Their interactions throughout history reflect that divide. Whenever Mew appears in environments where Mewtwo resides, it often does so from a distance, drifting close enough to observe, but never close enough to intrude. Mewtwo, sensing the presence, does not attack, but it tenses. It recognizes Mew not as a threat, but as a reminder of what it was cloned from, a reminder of a freedom it never had, a reminder of a softness it fears it cannot reclaim. Mew, understanding this tension instinctively, keeps its distance out of compassion rather than avoidance. That quiet understanding is why they dislike each other without ever falling into true conflict. It isn't anger, it's incompatibility born from different worlds. Yet, despite their friction, both possess an undeniable connection to the myths of creation. Mew's ancient presence permeates nearly every culture, Some civilizations believed it carried the spark of life within its cells. Others thought it drifted through the world to ensure balance among species. Mewtwo, though much younger, inadvertently became a symbol of humankind's hubris, an example of how tampering with forces too complex can lead to something powerful, yet emotionally fractured. Their stories form two halves of a larger legend, one representing origin, the other representing consequence. And still, both share an underlying truth. They seek understanding. Mew seeks to understand life by experiencing it, floating from place to place with gentle curiosity. Mewtwo seeks to understand life by observing it from afar, analyzing emotion and purpose like a puzzle it was never given the chance to solve. Their paths rarely align, yet their desires are deeply similar. One studies the world, the other studies itself. One searches outward, the other inward. It's that mirrored longing that makes their lore so rich. They are opposites born from the same spark, one natural, one manufactured, one free, one controlled, one eternal, one burdened. And yet both remain among the most powerful psychic beings to ever exist. Two reflections of potential, shaped by destiny and circumstance into entirely different forms. Mew has always existed in a strange and beautiful space between reality and imagination, and the more researchers learn about it, the more impossible it becomes to fully understand. Across countless regions, stories persist of people who encountered Mew without ever realizing it. Some describe catching sight of a pink blur drifting across a treetop as lightly as dust carried by wind. Others swear they saw a tail flick behind a waterfall or a small silhouette floating just beneath the surface of a quiet lake. The common thread in these accounts is how effortless Mew seems to move between the seen and unseen world, leaving behind only the faintest impression, like a dream half remembered in the morning. That ethereal quality contrasts sharply with Mewtwo's presence, which has never been subtle. Wherever Mewtwo goes, the air tends to shift, the atmosphere grows sharper, and the energy in the environment becomes heavier, as if the world recognizes its power even before a single psychic wave is released. Trainers who have stood in its presence describe an unsettling clarity, as though Mewtwo's mere awareness cuts through distractions and thoughts. The stillness that surrounds it isn't peaceful like Mew's. It's focused, vibrant, intense. Mewtwo's psychic pressure isn't a gentle hum. It's a pulse that makes the air feel alive with potential. This difference in aura reflects the difference in their origins. Mewtwo was created with purpose, engineered from Mew's DNA to maximize power, focus, and combat capability. That intensity is built into its very identity. Mew, on the other hand, represents what came before purpose, a creature formed by the natural flow of life rather than human intention. Its power doesn't clash with the world, it blends into it. Mewtwo's existence sometimes feels like a challenge to nature, while Mew feels like nature's own memory, drifting quietly through time. And because of those differences, Mew and Mewtwo have never been comfortable in each other's presence. Their mutual dislike is subtle, but unmistakable. Mewtwo sees Mew as a reminder of what it is not, a being born freely, without experiments, constraints, or expectations. Mew sees Mewtwo as a reflection of what it chose never to become, power sharpened into aggression. When the two meet, there is always a quiet tension, an understanding that they are bound by the same ancient DNA, yet separated by wildly different destinies. Even in their calmest moments, they orbit each other like opposing forces, each one aware that the other represents a truth they can't escape. This dynamic shaped one of the most important confrontations in Pokémon history. When Mew and Mewtwo clashed high above the abandoned laboratory where Mewtwo first awakened, It wasn't a battle born from hatred alone. It was a collision of philosophies: instinct versus invention, origin versus evolution, history versus future. Mew fought with effortless fluidity, its movements unpredictable and graceful, while Mewtwo fought with structure, precision, and raw force. Even to spectators who didn't understand the lore, the battle felt symbolic, a struggle not of good and evil, but of identity. Despite their conflict, both share the same extraordinary foundation: psychic abilities stronger than nearly any other Pokémon known. Mew's psychic potential expresses itself through creativity and curiosity. It uses telekinesis playfully, lifting small stones or bending streams of water as though trying to understand them. This gentle approach mirrors its nature. Mew doesn't use power to dominate, but to explore. Its psychic field can wrap itself around living beings with such softness that most don't notice until they feel slightly lighter or calmer than before. Mewtwo's psychic abilities, though stemming from the same origin, manifest with overwhelming force. It can stop hurricanes, warp gravity, and rewrite the environment around it. Its telekinetic grip is exact, like a blade of thought. While Mew's abilities resemble a painter working freely, Mewtwo's resemble a master craftsman chiseling the world to match its intent. This difference has fascinated researchers for decades: how two Pokémon with nearly identical genetic templates can express such opposite behaviors. The answer may lie in their emotional states. Mew's heart is open to the world. Mewtwo's was shaped in isolation. The early years of Mewtwo's existence were marked by confinement and experimentation, leaving deep psychic scars that shaped its sense of self and its mistrust of humans. Even long after escaping the lab, Mewtwo carries the weight of that trauma in the way it observes strangers, always evaluating risk before offering trust. Meanwhile, Mew seems to harbor no such wounds, floating through life with a lightness that suggests it has never truly feared anything. This contrast plays out in the environments they choose. Mew loves warm, quiet places filled with natural energy: ancient forests, crystal blue shallows, overgrown ruins where the air feels thick with history. It thrives in untouched landscapes where its natural curiosity can wander freely. Mewtwo prefers solitude, but not softness. It chooses places that are empty, quiet, and defensible: high mountains, underground caverns, or isolated islands where it can observe the world without being part of it. Even when surrounded by nature, Mewtwo feels more like a sentinel than a resident, as though it always expects danger. Yet the most interesting secret is that despite their differences, Mew and Mewtwo share a deep understanding of each other. They don't like one another, and perhaps they never will, but they recognize something few other beings could ever comprehend: the feeling of being alone at the top of psychic existence. Mew drifts alone because it chooses to. Mewtwo stands alone because it believes no one else can understand it. That loneliness, though shaped differently, echoes between them. When they lock eyes, neither sees a stranger. They see a reflection of what might have been. Researchers believe that Mew still occasionally approaches places connected to Mewtwo's origins, as though checking on its created counterpart. It never interferes, never makes contact, but its appearance is not random. Some think Mew feels responsible for Mewtwo's existence, the same way an ancestor feels concern for future generations. Mewtwo, on the other hand, is keenly aware of Mew's presence whenever it draws near, though it will never admit it. Their connection is silent, unspoken, complicated, and ancient, a relationship without resolution. Beyond their rivalry, both Pokémon have shaped history in their own ways. Mew's DNA still stands as one of the greatest scientific mysteries in the world. Studies show traces of its genetic presence in countless other Pokémon species, fueling theories that all modern Pokémon share some fragment of Mew's blueprint. Every evolutionary line, every regional variant, every adaptation across continents may carry echoes of the first Pokémon ever to exist. Even if this theory remains debated, it continues to influence research and spirituality across regions. For many cultures, Mew represents beginnings, a soft, drifting symbol of life's first spark. Mewtwo's influence, meanwhile, is a reminder of humanity's ambition and danger. It exposed the moral weight of creation, forcing the world to confront what happens when curiosity overpowers responsibility. The ruins of the laboratory, where it was born, remain untouched out of respect, a monument to error and discovery. Some see it as a warning, others see it as proof that humanity can learn from its mistakes. In that way, Mewtwo has become a symbol not only of power, but of the need for wisdom to guide it. Even their movements shape the world around them. When Mew drifts through a forest, plants shift slightly toward it, as if responding to invisible energy. When Mewtwo moves, the air tightens, sharpens, demanding attention. Mew leaves wonder, Mewtwo leaves awe. Both leave questions bigger than anyone can answer. And perhaps the strangest truth of all is that despite their distance, both continue to circle each other across time. Mew watching from afar, Mewtwo standing alone with guarded eyes, both connected by invisible threads of history, science, and fate. Their story is not one of friendship or reconciliation, it's one of balance, the original and the creation, the gentle and the intense, the past and the future. Two beings that were never meant to meet, yet always do. And as the world continues to change, both still roam, Mew dancing through forgotten places with joyful curiosity, and Mewtwo traveling with deliberate purpose, always searching for something even it cannot name. The universe feels a little heavier when Mewtwo moves, and a little lighter when Mew appears, and somehow both are needed to keep the world in harmony. For all the power Mewtwo commands, and all the ancient mystery that surrounds Mew, their stories diverge most sharply in how the world responds to them. People do not fear Mew, they long for it. Its sightings inspire awe instead of panic, curiosity instead of conflict. Researchers who have briefly encountered Mew often describe the experience as dreamlike, as if reality softened around it for just a moment. Even the way Mew moves across the landscape feels unreal, drifting, floating, almost dancing with the wind rather than cutting against it. The creature seems to carry a gentle field of psychic energy that smooths the environment around it, leaving plants swaying more softly and light bending just slightly toward it. These subtle details build an image of Mew, not as a legendary conqueror, but as a guardian spirit, wandering the world with no agenda beyond existing freely. Mewtwo, in contrast, forces the world to react. When it moves, the air shudders. Its power bends not only energy but attention. Every record of its presence carries an undertone of fear, even when the observer tries to describe it neutrally. The psychic pressure Mewtwo emits when it is emotionally heightened creates an almost gravitational pull, heavy, oppressive, unmistakable. Sensors that track ambient force fluctuations spike sharply in its vicinity, reflecting how unstable the surrounding atmosphere becomes. Even when calm, Mewtwo moves with a purpose that differs from all other Pokémon. Its posture is always ready, always anticipating, always calculating the distance between itself and whatever might threaten it next. Some researchers believe this tension in its body is permanent, born from its creation as a weapon rather than a living creature. Yet even with their differences, both Pokémon share a trait few others possess: a connection to psychic energy that borders on the divine. Mew's psychic abilities behave almost like instinctive imagination, creating barriers, illusions, or enhancements without visible strain. Mewtwo, on the other hand, wields psychic energy like a blade. It shapes force fields, lifts mountains, and shatters binding restraints with absolute precision. Mew's power is fluid, drifting outward like ripples in water, while Mewtwo's is sharp, controlled, and direct. The contrast is like comparing a flowing stream to a tightened bowstring, both powerful but in entirely different expressions. This contrast appears in their emotional signatures as well. Trainers who have formed psychic connections with Pokémon describe Mew's presence as warm, almost playful, like a mind filled with curiosity instead of fear. It radiates openness, inviting calm rather than demanding control. Mewtwo's presence, however, feels like a storm behind glass, focused, intense, deliberate. Its thoughts move quickly, analyzing and categorizing everything it encounters. Even when not agitated, its psychic field carries a constant hum of alertness, a reminder of the purpose forced upon it at birth. Some psychic Pokémon, such as Alakazam or Gardevoir, react noticeably when Mewtwo is near. Their senses heighten, and their emotional readings shift as if they feel the weight of its existence. Despite these differences, both Mew and Mewtwo possess intellect far beyond that of ordinary Pokémon. Mew's intelligence manifests through adaptability and understanding. It quickly learns patterns, imitates other Pokémon's behaviors, and uses its surroundings in ways that suggest creativity rather than instinct. Ancient records describe Mew shape-shifting playfully into smaller creatures to interact with early humans. It chose when to be seen, appearing to people who needed guidance, comfort, or inspiration. That ability to sense intention rather than appearance has long been interpreted as wisdom, not the cold logic of calculation, but the soft wisdom of empathy. Mewtwo's intelligence, by contrast, was engineered. Its mind processes information at a rate comparable to advanced supercomputers, yet it also experiences emotion with a depth that often conflicts with that cold precision. The clash between rational design and emotional reality is at the heart of Mewtwo's existence. It understands everything: data, tactics, danger, yet struggles with meaning. While Mew understands the world through connection, Mewtwo understands it through analysis. That difference has shaped both their lives. Mew drifts freely through the world because it feels safe within it. Mewtwo isolates itself because it feels safer at a distance. There are rare occasions, however, when their paths cross in records, and these moments reveal something profound about their relationship. The earliest eyewitness accounts describe Mewtwo sensing Mew's presence long before seeing it, reacting with a sharp psychic shift, as if the air itself remembered something Mew had forgotten. Mew, on the other hand, reacted with curiosity rather than fear, almost as if it did not recognize Mewtwo as a threat, but rather as something familiar. In these encounters, researchers observed Mew weaving circles through the air around Mewtwo, its movements playful and soft. Mewtwo remained still, tense, unsure of how to respond. There was no battle, no conflict, only tension, as if the two beings could not decide whether to embrace or avoid one another. This emotional divide reflects their deepest incompatibility. Mew is a creature of natural origin, shaped by time, spirit, and the flow of life. Mewtwo is shaped by human intent, created through manipulation rather than growth. Mew understands life through freedom. Mewtwo understands life through conflict. Their disagreement, their dislike, comes not from hatred, but from misalignment. One represents what life is, the other represents what life can be changed into. Mew does not resent Mewtwo, it simply cannot connect with something that was built rather than born. Mewtwo does not hate Mew, it simply cannot understand something that feels no fear. Yet across their stories, both seek the same thing: purpose. Mew's purpose is to preserve ancient knowledge and remain connected to the fabric of life. Mewtwo's purpose is something it must forge alone, free from the shadow of its creators. That struggle makes Mewtwo one of the most complex beings in the Pokémon world. Its loneliness is not born from aggression, but from identity. It wants to exist without being defined by the intentions of the scientists who created it. It wants to feel what Mew was born understanding, the quiet security of being part of a world rather than apart from it. Over time, Mewtwo's emotional landscape has softened, especially in regions where it has been observed interacting peacefully with other Pokémon. While it maintains distance, its restraint has become less hostile. Its telepathic communication, once sharp and commanding, has been seen shifting into gentler tones during rare interactions. Mewtwo may never mirror Mew's openness, but it is not incapable of warmth. It has simply spent its life learning how to protect itself from emotions it was never allowed to experience naturally. Mew, meanwhile, continues drifting through hidden corners of the world, its presence marked only by fleeting sparkles of psychic dust or small ripples of energy. It remains a creature of endless potential, a living archive of all Pokémon DNA, a reminder of the world's earliest days, a being capable of more forms and abilities than any other. Yet it chooses simplicity, it chooses play, it chooses quiet exploration of forests, jungles, ancient ruins, and untouched islands. It is the contrast to Mewtwo in every way, created by nature, driven by curiosity, unburdened by conflict. The world needs both of them. Mew holds the past, the origin, the quiet spark of life. Mewtwo holds the future, the result of human ambition, uncertain yet powerful, capable of shaping entire eras. Their stories do not cancel each other out, they complete each other. One shows the beauty of what life can create, the other shows the consequences of what humans try to control. And in that tension, both become essential to understanding the full scope of Pokémon history. Some believe that if Mew and Mewtwo ever truly understood each other, their combined psychic energy could reshape continents. Others believe they should never meet again, that the imbalance between them is too great. Yet most researchers quietly hope for a different outcome. They imagine a future where Mewtwo no longer fears what it once represented, and where Mew no longer drifts away from the shadow of its own descendant. A future where the first Pokémon and the engineered Pokémon stand not as opposites, but as reflections of two halves of existence, natural and created, free and forged, ancient and new. And somewhere in the world, Mew drifts through a quiet grove, tail swaying gently, its soft psychic field shimmering like morning mist. Somewhere else, far from human eyes, Mewtwo sits in stillness among stone ruins, the air around it humming faintly with thought. They exist apart, yet their stories remain intertwined, echoing across time like distant stars, one warm, one cold, both extraordinary in ways no other Pokémon can match. Mewtwo's relationship with the world has always been shaped by the one question it cannot escape. Why does it exist? Even after its rebellion, its isolation, its moments of reflection, and its rare instances of compassion, that single question remains woven into every choice it makes. Mewtwo was born with power greater than anything around it, yet burdened with a sense of origin that feels unnatural. It senses the emotions of others. It senses the flow of the world's energy, and it senses the memory of its own creation like a scar that never quite fades. That memory, that feeling of being engineered rather than born, is what fuels Mewtwo's deep dislike of Mew. To Mewtwo, Mew represents everything it never received: a natural existence, infinite potential without pain, and a bond with the world that was never forced. Even when Mewtwo gains control of its own destiny, the presence of Mew reminds it of everything taken from it before it had a chance to live. Mew, on the other hand, doesn't reciprocate that hostility. It doesn't respond with fear or anger. Instead, Mew approaches Mewtwo with a kind of quiet understanding, not pity, not superiority, but awareness. Mew's genes link it to every Pokémon, making its perception of life broader and more compassionate. When Mew observes Mewtwo, it sees a fractured mirror of its own existence, a being made from its essence, yet shaped into something so different that the two now represent opposite ends of evolution itself. Scientists once believed Mew to be simple and playful, but its behavior during encounters with Mewtwo reveals something deeper, a wisdom that comes not from power, but from timelessness. It recognizes Mewtwo's pain, even when Mewtwo tries to hide it behind cold logic and immense psychic energy. This emotional dissonance forms the core of their dynamic. Mewtwo rejects Mew's carefree nature, interpreting it as ignorance. Mew rejects conflict, interpreting it as unnecessary. And so the two drift through the world, circling each other, not as enemies but as philosophical opposites. Mewtwo obsesses over purpose. Mew embodies freedom. Mewtwo calculates. Mew adapts. Mewtwo pushes. Mew floats. Even their psychic signatures are different. Mewtwo's energy is sharp, intense, and deliberate, while Mew's is fluid and vibrant, moving like light dancing in water. Yet the strongest thread tying them together isn't conflict at all. It's inevitability, because no matter how far they travel, Mewtwo can never fully ignore the presence of the Pokémon from which its existence began. Mew's history stretches back so far that even ancient civilizations left behind only hints of its presence. Cave murals in regions like Guyana depict a small, cat-like figure surrounded by swirling energy, sometimes shown next to depictions of legendary Pokémon like Ho-Oh or Lugia. The implication is simple but profound. Mew has been observing the world since long before humans understood Pokémon, quietly watching civilizations rise and fall. Its ability to transform into any Pokémon may have initially led early cultures to view it as a shape-shifting spirit rather than a biological creature. In some legends, Mew is described as the child of every Pokémon, while in others it is the ancestor of all. Both interpretations hint at the same truth. Its cells carry the key to the diversity of life across the entire Pokémon world. Mewtwo, by contrast, has no ancient murals. Its story has no mythology, no folklore, no roots in nature. Its story begins in a sterile lab beneath a mansion, surrounded by cold equipment, the scratching of pens on clipboards, and an endless cycle of tests. Yet this contrast only amplifies the tragedy of Mewtwo's existence, a being shaped by science, forced into intelligence before its heart could catch up. The journals discovered in the remnants of that mansion paint a chilling picture of the psychological pressure Mewtwo endured from the moment it became aware. It learned language before instinct, reason before emotion, calculation before compassion. These artificial beginnings shape its every thought, every hesitation, and every burst of psychic power that shakes the world. And when Mewtwo reflects on Mew, those memories deepen the divide. How could a creature like Mew, playful, light, almost whimsical, understand what it feels like to have been created? How could it possibly relate to being engineered for power, expected to be a weapon before it ever took its first breath? Mewtwo resents Mew because Mew is free from the weight of expectation. But Mew understands Mewtwo because it knows what it means to carry possibility. Mew doesn't hate Mewtwo for its hostility. In many ways, it recognizes Mewtwo as the logical outcome of humanity's attempt to replicate perfection, a mirror that reflects not only Mew's potential, but the flaws of those who sought to harness it. Mew's abilities remain some of the most versatile in all of Pokémon history. It can perform nearly every move ever discovered, a trait that continues to puzzle researchers. Some believe this versatility is what makes Mew the genetic ancestor of all Pokémon. Its cells contain the blueprint for every evolutionary line, every elemental adaptation, every species variation. Even modern scientific tools struggle to map its DNA, which appears to shift subtly depending on the environment, as though responding to elements around it. Mew's playful behavior often masks this adaptability. When it transforms into other Pokémon, it doesn't simply mimic their appearance, it mimics their aura, their movement style, even their emotional posture. This makes Mew not just a transformer, but an interpreter of life. Mewtwo's abilities are the opposite, not flexible, but focused. Its psychic power exists at a higher frequency than any naturally occurring Pokémon. Scientists who studied its energy output determined that its brain emits psychic waves strong enough to distort electromagnetic fields, gravitational pull, and even biological signals within nearby creatures. This is why Mewtwo can lift entire buildings, erase memories, or immobilize opponents with a mere thought. The limit of its power remains unknown because every time Mewtwo reaches a threshold, it seems to break past it through sheer will. Mega Mewtwo X and Y further emphasize this limitless potential, one form representing physical mastery, the other pure psychic transcendence. Both forms reveal that Mewtwo is not confined to the power humans designed it to have. It has already surpassed those intentions. Despite their differences, Mew and Mewtwo share one undeniable connection: loneliness. Mew, for all its freedom, seems to travel alone, flitting from region to region with no fixed habitat. It appears unexpectedly, often only for brief moments, like a creature that feels too much responsibility to stay in one place for long. Mewtwo's loneliness is heavier. It isolates itself out of distrust, convinced that others seek to control or manipulate its power. While Mew moves through solitude with curiosity, Mewtwo moves through it with caution. Yet both creatures remain distant from the everyday world of trainers and Pokémon. Both remain hidden, both remain mythic, and both carry burdens shaped by the nature of their existence. Some theorists believe this shared isolation is the root of their connection, that Mew recognizes in Mewtwo a loneliness shaped into hardness, while Mewtwo misinterprets Mew's freedom as indifference. Their rare interactions often reflect this misunderstanding. Mew approaches with gentle movements, floating lightly, testing boundaries with empathy. Mewtwo reacts with tension, interpreting the softness as patronizing. It cannot comprehend why Mew treats it with understanding rather than fear. And Mew, in turn, doesn't understand why Mewtwo treats itself with such harsh expectations. They misunderstand each other because they are reflections of each other, one born from nature, the other shaped by human ambition. Mewtwo's battle potential remains unmatched because it blends emotional depth with overwhelming power. It doesn't fight recklessly, it fights with intention. Its psychic attacks carry precision, its defensive barriers form with instinctual control, and its movements reflect both aggression and restraint. In aerial combat, it moves faster than most flying Pokémon. On the ground, it strikes with a physical strength that rivals fighting types. Its mind remains its greatest weapon, capable of predicting attacks, analyzing weaknesses, and adjusting strategies instantly. Yet underneath all this lies a truth that few acknowledge. Mewtwo does not enjoy conflict. It fights because it must. It fights because the world has conditioned it to prove itself at every turn. Mew, by contrast, rarely seeks battle at all. Its tactics are evasive, playful, and curious. When Mew battles, it often does so without malice, using moves creatively to explore rather than dominate. It shifts type advantages fluidly, adapting like a creature testing possibilities. Even when Mew becomes serious, its power feels lighter, not because it's weaker, but because it wields strength without the weight of self-doubt. Its psychic abilities interact with emotion differently than Mewtwo's. Where Mewtwo's energy cuts, Mew's energy flows. Mew destroys obstacles, Mew reshapes them. Together, they form a pair unlike any other duo in the Pokémon world. Not a legendary duo bound by harmony like Ho-Oh and Lugia, and not a duo bound by rivalry like Dialga and Palkia. Instead, they are bound by a philosophical divide, a reflection of two paths branching from the same root. One path led to creation without consent, the other to life without boundaries. One represents the cost of ambition, the other the freedom of existence. And somewhere between those paths lies the truth neither has fully grasped, that their stories are forever intertwined, not by choice, but by origin. And so they continue their journeys, drifting through the world on separate paths, yet always within the same mythology. Mew flits through forests, ancient ruins, and forgotten islands, leaving behind traces of life's oldest memory. Mewtwo moves through caves, mountains, abandoned labs, and silent fields, always questioning, always evolving, always seeking something it cannot name. Their dislike for each other remains, not out of hatred, but out of misunderstanding born from two different worlds. Yet that tension is what keeps their stories alive, echoing across generations as players continue to wonder whether the two will ever fully understand one another.